present today, and I have a history with the program as well, having been part of the initial committee that created it, and I've been working as a mental health therapist for 30-odd years, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Christy Fields. I'm a lead social worker for New Mexico Family Advocacy. I've been with the program since its inception, about 5 years.
Thank you. Leslie, would you like to, first of all, let me give a couple quick announcements. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at Susan's PowerPoint. The link to it came in the email that went out to everybody yesterday. If not, Laura has posted the link to that which is we put your presentation in the resource library, Susan, so everybody can download it and review later as well. Also keep in mind that we're also recording the session up until the second case, so that if you would like to go back or you have an associate or peer that cannot attend today, they'll be able to access it probably in a week or two, access today's recording so that they could refer back, especially to the workshop and our case presentations. We also are looking, and I want to really thank Brian and Christy today, but we now really need your help with giving you time to present your challenging cases, challenging dilemmas that you're facing, both in your practice or in particular case. Your practice of using the family advocacy tenets in your work. And please reach out to me, Leslie, Christy, Laura, and we'll all help you to put those presentations and work together. It's really one of the most important parts of each one of our ECHO sessions. Leslie?
Well, thank you. So today our presenter is Susan Burns. She will be presenting on psychosocial, developmental, and mental health obstacles to parental and family success. Her presentation is specifically geared to our population. She, as she indicated, she was with us from the beginning when we were developing the pilot project for this program in Sandoval County. She was also a former field education coordinator and has earned her master's degree in social work in 1985 from Michigan State University. She is currently a school social worker for the Albuquerque Sign Language Academy Charter School in Albuquerque. She's been in practice for 30 years and was a New Mexico State University professor for advanced social work practice for 10 of those years. So we'd like to welcome her. I think that she will definitely have, I'm looking forward to hearing from her. She'll have really valuable information for us that we can use in helping our practice and advocacy for our clients.
Thanks, Leslie. And before we move on, I may note we're in a very different physical location. The law school, which has been our primary hub and location where we've presented together and worked together the last month, is kind of closed up today for final exams. So we've moved very quickly at the last minute to the headquarters of ECHO Institute. Can everybody see the presentation slide on their screens? If you could just put a thumbs up. All right, so we're good. Thank you, Susan. It's all yours.
Okay. First of all, can you hear me? Thumbs up? Good? Okay. Speaking loudly has never really been a problem for me. All right. It didn't go. Let's try that again. Oh, no, it still didn't go.
Just click on it.
There it is. All right. So I recognize that this 10-page or so PowerPoint that I put together could go hours, not 20 minutes, not 30 minutes. But that's okay, because this is the beginning of a couple of these that I've been sort of like signed up for, and I'm excited about that. So I'd like us to think about what I'm talking about today. Maybe we could gear up something that's more specific from all those things I'm talking about, and we can do that again another time. But it is my point to discuss sort of the range and complexity of all the things that are part of the population that we work with. You know, we have plenty of community. We have never enough community-based treatment resources, we have more than some cities, but we don't ever have enough. And even if we had enough, we can't always get our clients there. And so that's an important consideration of what we do. How do we get them there, and how do we keep them there? So, you are the FAP. I don't have to tell you what you're doing. You're here to help find that balance between support and challenge for all the clients that you work with, for the life choices of these parents. Many of the clients have generational psychosocial mental health complications that are always going to make working with them difficult, and sabotages their own desire for success. They're not out to do harm on purpose, most of them, and some of them do, and they hopefully get weeded out. Parents who are not successful, that might be the worst thing that they could imagine being, but they sabotage their own desires. So the long-term challenges for clients: developmental delays, mental health realities, and psychosocial concerns. So start with the developmental delays, and I'm working now at a school where developmental delays and even more complicated delays than that are significantly, will always impact life, and are only sort of an aspect of treatment and maintenance, not repair and change. So disorders across lifespan, intellectual disabilities, autism, attention deficit issues, the schizophrenia spectrum. And I have a small knowledge of your populations because I've been doing supervision with two of you in the program, and so I'm aware of the kinds of clients that we bring, that you work with. So those are not unheard of in all of your work. You have at one time been involved with someone with one of those or more of those at the same time. Mental health realities, chronic conditions, like I say, the schizophrenia spectrum, autism. There are issues that are chronic needs that need a lifelong maintenance versus an adjustment disorder, or even a depression that can cause terrible behavior, but is quite treatable with medication and also therapies, not so quite the same way schizophrenia might be, or a developmental disorder from birth. The psychosocial concerns, poverty, homelessness, little of any family support. I know that you know this. These are the clients that you work with. So what I want to talk about for a minute is that, okay, I'm going to go back. I think I can do that 1 second. So any of those three things, oops, that's the wrong way. There we go. Any of those three will be problematic and have multiply complex solutions because there's multiply complex problems inside any one. But in truth, we don't stop with just one. We have the combination of all three at the same time, much of the time. And there's a science in sociology that addresses what's called wicked social problems. And I know I brought this up when I came to speak to you guys back at in the courthouse to talk with you about future. And I think it's a huge thing. And it's actually something that is not new. It has become popular again to think about because our world has become more complex. Social problems are more complex. So the wicked problems being all of the combinations of the three things we just saw on the last slide, made worse by incomplete or contradictory knowledge. I'm going to talk a little bit in a minute about some information that comes from the Children's Bureau about things like maltreatment of children based on prior maltreatment of parents. That is not a given. The number of people and opinions involved. How many agencies do you all work with? How many people at each agency? How many levels at each agency? The economic burden that all of those difficulties cost, and the cost even of the work that CYFD has to, in a vacuum, do. And the economic burden is one of those difficulties to solve these wicked problems, and the interconnected nature of the problems with other problems. Poverty is linked with education, nutrition with poverty, economy with nutrition, so on. These are just an example, but Every one of these problems can't be solved until another problem is solved, but that problem can't be solved until this other problem is solved. And there you are. It's like an Assyrian, a Mobius strip thing that just goes on and on. And so I have, in the resources that I gave you, I have some sites to look at about that. It's fascinating. It's a little depressing because the whole point of a wicked problem is that you really can hardly solve them. But yet here you are. We have to try, right? We have to try. When I talk about this, am I too loud or am I okay? I do get elevated when I talk. You guys, is okay hearing wise, volume wise? All right. It's really weird to be like kind of a disconnect. I'm in my mirror in my bathroom talking to myself. It's kind of strange.
You're doing great.
I have a strong science background. Before I became a social worker, I was a botanist, I was a biologist, and I would spend a lot of time titrating just the right color of chemical with just the right liquid, and boom, it would turn just the right color of blue, meaning I'd done the right thing. We don't find that kind of clarity and black and whiteness, or I should say turquoise blueness, if you're talking about certain chemicals you're working with. You can't find that in our work. It doesn't exist. And so part of the reality of the wicked problem concept is it's always gray. There is just never a black and white solution. There are many, many solutions that are clearly black and white wrong, or even behaviors or solutions that are black and white wrong. But people themselves and the work we do for them is never black and white. And so it's hard to live with that. It's a burden of incompleteness. And I'm a social scientist, and I have huge respect for people who work with people, because my husband can't. He's too black and white. All right. So I discussed briefly a minute ago that even the Children's Bureau have a very long website. I suggest you look at it. The whole discussion of intergenerational maltreatment of children has been sort of assumed as a given. Well, of course that's true. Of course they do. If you've been abused as a child, pretty much guaranteed you're going to abuse your children. And they go on at length to say it is still not a given that that is true. You can read studies that say 7% of parents who've been abused abuse their children, and you can find a study that says 70% of children of parents abuse their children. And so again, it's gray. It's that wicked problem. It'd be great if you could just find that number and it was true, because the solution would be more obvious. The solution would be more focused, but it's not. So let me move on one more slide. You're gonna keep track of my time, right? Because I won't be able to. You have to let me know when you got 5 minutes.
About 15 minutes.
Okay, that's good. Because really my point today was to open up some things that I think, having listened to, you mind if I use your name? No. Okay. Having listened to Christy and Caitlin now for quite a long time, and in the generalities of the work and the kinds of work that you do, these have been formulating in my mind as things that are part of the work. And so I'm excited to have a chance to throw them out for us to think about another time. So the intergenerational maltreatment of children. Yes, okay. Obviously, children who are maltreated as children, people who are maltreated as children, grow up with some deficits that, if left unresolved, will cause great difficulty in their life. Whether that becomes child abuse or not, that's not a given. These are more of the things that contribute to the cycle continuing. These, again, you could have told me all these things, and in fact, basically over the 2 years, Christy and Caitlin have told me these things contribute. The financial difficulty our clients get in, the parental age, education, psychiatric history, poor or absent social support, parental life stress, which may trigger anxiety, depression, or trigger other mental illnesses, the maternal emotional dysregulation and negative affect. I'm going to talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Tendency to respond to minor provocations with verbal or physical aggression. Oh, you know what? I changed my slide. That's okay. I can ad lib. So I added something, and I can give you guys a little more updated version. I added a couple things to the slide that Oh, never mind. That's on the dysregulation slide. Moving ahead. Skip that. Maternal substance abuse, intimate partner violence. And you could probably add a couple more. In fact, write them down. Think about them. What more do you see as parts of the social system contribute to the cycle continuing? But in all of those, however many of those are, 10 or 11, it doesn't say abuse as children, because those things can be part of anybody's life. Anybody at any one time with enough provocation and stress can resort to any of those solutions to deal with what's going on. And so there is no, these are the things that cause the problems that we're looking at, not necessarily just abuse as a child, but certainly that's part of it. Okay, talked about dysregulated behavior. Dysregulated, there's a site for this in your resource. Dysregulated behavior is something that you probably see all the time out in the world. Dysregulated behavior is the guy that shoots the driver in front of him because he's mad because he cut him off on the freeway. Dysregulated behavior is the woman that goes crazy in the bank line she chose to stand in. Although now we don't have to stand in bank lines anymore, right? Because we've got online stuff. But how many of you have thought, I'm going to stand in the wrong bank line, and sure enough, you're in the right, and they're yelling and screaming. So dysregulated behavior is an inability to control an impulse, an inability to control an unwanted internal feeling. So the aim in these dysregulated behaviors is to turn off intolerable emotions or urges through addictive, self-destructive, and impulsive behaviors. So you think to yourself as you're just going through this, your clients that you see with any of these self-destructive, could be other destructive, impulsive behaviors, addictive behaviors, what are those behaviors in reaction to? They provide a short-term relief or pressure or pleasure that will undoubtedly cause harm over time. The short relief is now I don't feel so angry anymore. The long-term problem is likely that it does cause addiction. It does cause family distress. It causes aggression that leads to the problems that we're here to talk about in terms of child abuse. And nothing can make a person frustrated than a child. And I'm working now at a school where these children will scream all day long because it's all that they can communicate with. And I'm amazed at how I feel so flustered and so anxious. And so, you know, this is children. Oops, we just lost those guys. Is that, well, okay.
There you are.
So then it becomes a patterned, repeated, embedded response to any stress. As soon as I feel that upsetness coming on, I know that I will do X, Y, Z, and that stress will go away for the moment. That is behavior that's extremely hard to stop, even when that person knows it's causing harm. They know they shouldn't do it. They know it's hurtful, and they're trying very hard. How did that happen? Where did those 10 minutes go? They know it's causing harm, and they really want to stop, and they try. Okay, tonight I won't drink. Well, that's great. They didn't drink tonight. Tomorrow they will. Long histories of being judged and criticized for being lazy, selfish, weak, character flawed, for repeating the behavior by families, by therapists, by perhaps lawyers, by judges. They are endlessly given disdain for not being able to stop something that's clearly hurting somebody else, which makes building rapport, which is where the clinicians to this program come in. It makes building rapport especially challenging. It's ripe for countertransference because of our own frustration due to the slow progress that these people show. And I would be willing to bet a huge number, if not everybody, who ends up abusing a child has dysregulated behavior. Because if you didn't, you would do something different. And so that's and how you deal with dysregulated behavior is an enormous long-term thing. So moving on. So the interventions and resources, well, here they are. They're home visiting programs, parent education, mental health therapies, individual and family, substance abuse work. As I said, these programs exist in town. They don't exist enough, never enough money. But how do we get our clients there? How do we keep them there? This is where the complex clinical case management that is the social work focus for your program is. It's being able to stand by and still stand by no matter how frustrated you get while the client moves through their own decision whether they're going to return to a status where they can take their children or not, or surrender them. So that is ultimately your work. The process of getting there, it's not black and white. I think I'm on, actually, okay, well, this timing is good. So these are the references I have you to look at. They will all lead to many more references. So the wicked problems, the intergenerational maltreatment of children, the dysregulated behavior is extremely social working. That's obviously where I live. That's where you live, those of you who are the clinicians, and clearly I'd love to talk a lot more about that another time, or several other times. But the wicked problems, I want you to go read some about, that's a website, wickedproblems.com/9works. That is really a good presentation of those 4 obstacles to solutions that each of you are different systems. I assume there might be some CYFD folks. We've got court, we've got lawyers, we've got the therapists, the social workers. Everybody has there's like that blind people looking at an elephant issue is what part of this problem are you looking at and getting most involved with may have nothing to do with the other person's focus. And yet it's the same elephant. Okay, I think I'm done for the moment.
Okay.
You're not done yet.
So we'd like to open it up then for if there are any questions from the folks. Please, if you have a question, raise your hand and unmute when we call on you. It looks like Justice Mays has her hand up, meaning is there a question that you had that you'd like us to address right away? And if so, you can, you're unmuted now if you would like to go ahead and ask that question. Hello, Justice?
No, I did not have a question. Sorry.
Okay. All right. Just want to make sure. So if anybody else has any questions, and please remember when you ask your question to tell us your name and your position, where you're logged in from. Anyone? No? So
I have a question.
What about here at the hub?
So, Susan, could you maybe explain for those who are in the audience about maybe how some of those speak up so you can hear me? Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So explain how maybe some of those dysregulated behaviors can show itself in court, because a lot of times we're there with parents and it's a really scary process.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're sitting at the table with the attorney, we're sitting with the parents, and we're there. This is the scariest place that they have been in this court, because it's pertaining to the either return or the loss of their children. And so sometimes we see different behaviors that can be perceived by others as, you know, people are not paying attention, or they don't care, or they're those kind of things, and explaining what we see is not always what that might be intended.
Right. And actually, that is actually what I thought. I was supposed to do this again in June.
Oh.
And I think that's what I was going to be talking about more specifically.
Okay.
But that's cool. I'll give you a little preview. Well, the slide that I had where it said that these people have experienced failure after failure after failure, shame after shame after shame by their own behaviors and then other people's views of their behaviors. Give up easy. They surrender to authority easily, or not at all, and will fight to the death, fight to the nth degree to gain some sense of power back. even when they know, the more they argue with somebody, the more it's, they will say to you, yeah, I know I shouldn't have yelled at the lawyer, I shouldn't have yelled at the judge, I know it, but I couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand being told one more time, whatever that is. And so that's the part of the dysregulated behavior that there is, especially in anybody who is educated enough, who has some degree of world experience, knows that what I'm doing is not a good thing to do, but I can't stop it. And so there is you're yelling at me, I'm feeling bad about you, I'm going to make you feel bad about yourself. I'm going to tell you, well, you don't know anything, you're this or that, there's a need to fight back, a need to insult back, a need to show disrespect. It matches the disrespect that they feel. And it's really weird to say that. I understand that feels strange, and we're talking about people who have injured, hurt, abandoned, neglected children. How do we show them a piece of respect? But it is inherent in anybody's sense of self that they deserve something, and so they will fight back. That's about for now. Is that a good enough kind of answer?
Sure.
But I do want to talk more about that, because I recognize that it is the hardest thing I have had in my quickly. So as an adolescent mental health therapist for many years, I had a lot of kids who would try anything they could to have me get rid of them. You're too fat. What do you know about anything? Huh? Wow. Gosh. You might be kind of true, but what does that got to do with you being in my office? I mean, that level of breathing and reduction, they're trying to shame me because they feel shamed and they think I'm going to kick them out if I feel shamed enough. And that wasn't enough. Try again, because that's not going to work. And so being able to breathe through some of that, what looks like tremendous disrespect, because it's really what they're feeling inside that they're going to dump on out loud on top of you.
So I have a question about, so you're talking about these wicked problems and that the challenge of that there's no black and white, and kind of there may be some really clearly very wrong answers, but not necessarily like the one right. But what we're faced with is levels of assessment that get ordered for these parents.
Right.
And so I'm wondering, what can we realistically expect from these different levels of assessment? So we get psychosocials ordered, we get mental health assessments ordered, we get psychological evaluations ordered, we get neuropsych evaluations ordered. We get, they get a bunch of assessments that are requested, parenting assessment, substance abuse, so all these assessments, and most of them are done in combination, not the psychosocial, which is usually done either by the CYFT social worker or now one of our FAB social workers, but a lot of these mental health assessments are done by intake workers at the various agencies, right? And some of them are licensed social workers, some are not. But what can we realistically expect in terms of actually identifying or even getting more insight into the parents' actual problems from these levels of assessment? Does that make sense?
Well, so what you're saying is that there's a range of the perhaps quality or capability of the actual people doing some assessments at times. So that's a big question. Right. There's probably a great deal of difference between what the client provides person A, if you guys are all assessors. However person A makes me feel, I'm going to give this much information. How person B makes me feel, I'm going to give you the finger and you can just go away. And so there is, it's a good question. Now so in terms of being able to get, I think one of the most relevant pieces of information probably, and it's a bias because I am a social worker, does come from the longevity of the social work relationship, because you're going to have all these assessments and some of them are going to be really accurate, positive or negative, and some of them maybe won't be so accurate. But what you have is people who are trained in assessment of what's the connection being made with the client, the information that comes from these assessments should be something that a good social worker can understand or go into more in depth with the team and with the client. And so I think that there are times that there are things that come up from the relationship with the social worker over time that will either support or really question an assessment. And so that's kind of what I would say. A little bit of that is that this program, I think, is, I mean, the social work component of this legal program is what's making the success, when there has been, more obvious, because there's this the longevity of that relationship.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, do we want to, are we ready to, are there any other questions before we move on? Does anyone else have any questions that they would like to ask Susan? Anybody? So if not, then I think we'll move on to the next segment, which is our case presentations.
Make sure I get the right one. Is this yours?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So bear with me as I expand this up a little bit. Hopefully that's big enough for everybody to see. So for those of you who may be new, how many of you are visiting with us on our echo session for the first time? Could you just put a thumbs up? If you don't have your camera on, unless you're having a real bad hair day or you are not in a private area, please, this is a great time to turn your cameras on and really join in. This is our second segment is what we call our case-based learning, where really all teach and all learn. And we have two case presentations scheduled for today. Christy Fields will be giving one from kind of her practice as one of the lead social workers in the FAP program. And I really, again, would like, because I know Catherine and maybe some others are thinking about getting ready to present soon as well. So this is more of a general case presentation. Our process is she will read her case to us, her challenging dilemma and questions. We'll have a few minutes for some clarifying questions that you will have time to dive a little bit more deeply. And then our main intent is to have about 10 minutes for some recommendations that we all might have, and hopefully you could stay for this time, can't you, Susan?
Yes, I can.
That would be great, because I know these, I looked at the cases and they're very related to what you're, and we'll be sharing the cases, and Christy, as you know, we'll be keeping notes here at the hub for you so that you can really kind of be engaged and participate, and we'll share those recommendations to everyone here in the next several days. So Christy, I've put your case presentation on the screen if you'd like to share that with us.
Sure. So a challenging question that has come up throughout the course of the 5 years that we have been in existence. So how can we as advocates for parents in child dependency cases ensure that parents are receiving the right mental health and or substance use treatment so that families can be successfully unified? And how can we effectively challenge some treatment recommendations in a way that doesn't offend the provider as a call to questioning their credibility as a therapist? And kind of where I mean with that is where we're going is oftentimes we see, and these are not just like CYFD plans, I'm talking about mental health assessments and mental health treatment plans, is that they can be cookie cutter assessments, and they, we've seen assessments that are cut and paste from, several different clients will have very similar language in their treatment plans, and it is sort of devoid, it lacks details on how to tailor this treatment for our specific parent with their specific needs. And so we struggle with that. What we've done in the past is, I'm pretty direct and open in talking about that with whatever the therapist, whether that's, the individual therapist, whether that's the neuropsychologist, right, approaching that. And sometimes it's gone really well, and sometimes it is disastrous. Right? I have had my own cases where they will never speak to me again because they thought of it as a challenging them as a clinician. And that wasn't my intention. That's not even how I went in with that. So finding ways that we can help support each other in how do we do that in a way that's nuanced, that helps us get our client what they need.
Well, I had an instant thought, big one, but I was thinking about the wicked problems issue, And I thought to myself, perhaps there might be a community discussion of the program that you have with the people who are the most providers, the agencies that provide the most kinds of interventions that you request, assessments, whatever. There's only, I don't know, 20 in the city. It isn't even like there's a ton. But to call a community meeting about what is the program. I mean, anybody could come to that meeting for one thing. Parents who are like, oh, if they ever knew I did this, I'd be in trouble. Maybe they would think, oh my gosh, I'm gonna go for some help. So I'm wondering if maybe before the problem exists because of the poorly done assessment or the questionable result, there maybe needs to be some energy put into the community buy-in or understanding of what is the program. I don't know. So I just thought about that.
No, I think that's a really good idea for us to be with providers.
Before, no case
With no
involved,
case involved, yeah.
just the discussion of what you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you, Susan. And Christy is asking for recommendations on strategies to ensure parents are receiving the right mental health and/or substance abuse treatment in child dependency cases, and effectively and appropriately challenging that cookie cutter therapist recommendation. Does that kind of nail it? Okay, good. So let's take a few minutes for some additional clarifying questions. And if you're ready with like Susan, if you've got a recommendation you want to jump in with right away, please do. I'd ask Angie and Jessica and Lee and our friends on the phone to go ahead and unmute yourself now, or turn on your cameras. That would be really helpful if you can. Renee as well, so that we can have our discussion and questions, clarifying questions and recommendations. Who would like to go first? And also, if I might add, Betty, if you would get a chance, if you're still there, if you would like to adjust your camera. We're seeing a great picture of either the floor or the ceiling. I'm not sure. All right. Thanks, Renee. Do we have some clarifying questions or recommendations? While you're thinking of those questions, or I don't know, a couple of you are driving at the same time. Nita, can you hear us? Go ahead.
I can, and I'm sorry I can't raise my hand because obviously I'm technologically challenged here, but.
Well, you can just physically raise your hand too.
Okay. So my question to you is more along the lines of, when we talk about dysregulation, you know, that sometimes it's hard not to think about, well, what are also not, is there just emotional issues, but I'm talking about environmental issues. And so I'd like to know, how much does the basic needs play into dysregulation? So if we are talking about one of many of our clients who, let's say, housing is a significant issue, we're constantly struggling to just get them off the street, how is that playing into dysregulation? And I'm sorry, it's not necessarily exactly related to Christy's case plan here. It's sort of a delayed question, but I just keep coming back to that issue of dysregulation and how do these basic needs play into that?
Well, I was just thinking about Maslow's hierarchy of need. Anybody who is a human service provider, teacher, probably has studied that, looked at it. And I think it's the answer is kind of obviously it's got to play a great deal into it, because there's no sense of permanent security, protection, even to myself, much less the people I'm trying to take care of. So I think, you know, we have just finished legislatures where we're trying to get money from our services. I think the Section 8 has finally just kind of reopened momentarily for a moment, and then there was something about Section 8 becoming momentarily more available again and then not available again. So yes, it does. But I think probably not having a permanent security of home is going to lead to the next problem down the road pretty quickly. Because not being able to solve that is going to create more anxiety, more depression, more fear, which is probably going to increase perhaps substance abuse, perhaps law breaking, trying to, yeah. Go ahead.
So when we're talking about that, so my role in these cases is I'm an attorney, but when we're trying to advocate for our clients, it's not, many times I've tried to bring up housing to the courts and that's all well and dandy, but I think ultimately it sounds like what might be more helpful is if we go back to these providers who our clients are attempting to see and ask them specifically, can you write like a recommendation, or what are you seeing with this particular client and their inability to regulate or really truly engage in services, because they're always having to worry about basic needs, transportation, housing, are they safe for the night, that sort of thing, so that it kind of really, I guess, highlights that issue. Is that, I don't know, has anyone had any experience or luck with that? Would you have any, what would you say as a provider to that sort of request? How could I frame that to be a better advocate for my clients?
I sadly feel like sometimes the therapeutic world really forgets how hard it is to take a bus across town. And so yes, your appointment's at 1 o'clock, and if you're 15 minutes late, you're done. I'm not going to see you, and I'm going to move on to my next person, which if you are a person and managing your life through your private practice income and that's it, that's kind of, there's sort of I could see how that would be an easy thing to do. But so what I'm saying is I have seen this forever, that the clients who are most desperately in need cannot get to the care that they need to get to because they don't have even transportation or even money for bus fare. I mean, it's such a small thing and huge. So I will first of all say, yes, you're totally right. You can't, how can you develop relationships to move into the higher levels of the things that you're dysregulated about if you can't even get those needs met to get because of bus, because of home, because there is no home to get cleaned up in and make a good presentation to the court, to the next worker you're seeing. Well, that's back. I mean, I will not be able to solve the wicked problems that we talked about, but there are discussions that have to happen with all the people involved. So the therapists that they see, the agencies they see, can they look at policies to make open door, open house, no appointments, whoever shows up, we're going to talk to you at these hours in the morning. I mean, those are the things that I guess we have to creatively, as people who are providers for anything, make more accessible to the people who are not just the worried well.
So it's interesting. Thanks, Nita, for your question. Even though it's not as directly related to Christy's challenge and dilemma, it's really being a retired educator, that Maslow's hierarchy, to get to those kinds of issues that you're bringing up. At the same time, you need to address the transportation and the housing and so on. Did you have something you wanted to add?
I wanted to add, and I'll put in a plug for one of our later echo sessions, which is that we are going to have a session by Beth Gilia in a few about the federal legislation, the new Families First, and that there actually is going to be money available in that now, finally, for things like housing and other kinds of interventions to help people be successful getting to therapy or, having those kind of support. So I just encourage people to join us for that as well, because we will definitely be talking about how we as advocates can try to access that money for our clients.
And also, since you're mentioning please joining us, also invite your associates, your peers and co-workers, elbow partners to join us in these sessions. We're sending out the invitations. We can send more out and have more folks involved. So please keep that in mind as you look at our list and schedules. We have a couple more minutes reserved for this section of our case presentations. Is there anyone else who would like to offer a recommendation for Christy? Again, looking at the idea of strategies to ensure parents are receiving the right mental health, you know, keeping in mind that they've got some basic transportation needs met so they can get to those locations, as well as housing and so on. Any areas, any folks here that have found a particular program that does good intakes, that could help with that, provides those services? Renee, would you like to join in?
Well, I think for us in the second therapy, part of the issue on like ensuring they get the right services, it unfortunately starts at the custody where the same services are ordered for each respondent. So the information that the investigator is going on is based on a lot of times third party, grandma, grandpa, neighbors. And so the list of problems is incredible and not usually accurate. So the idea that we're ordering these at least assessments from the very first minute they've ever stepped in the courtroom, I think is discouraging, because I've had, for instance, a deaf client who had a hard time understanding because she was deaf. So automatically the department assumed she was on drugs because she couldn't understand what anyone was saying. So that sets us down a different path than a client who needs services because she's deaf and or partially deaf and had a hard time understanding because it wasn't being communicated to her correctly. So I think that may be something, not to push it off on the court, but it may be something that we can work with judicial staff to recognize. We don't necessarily have to start ordering assessments from the custody. If we could get to the mediation and if the PPWs could speak to the respondents before the mediation, I think that would be great, because then they can come into the mediation with a plan. And then we have, I think, more valuable discourse. I'm really surprised even now by the number of cases that we have, at least in my experience, where we get to mediation and the only person who's spoken to the respondent is me. That they haven't had one meeting with the new PPW because they were so used to working with the investigator during that brief period of time before custody. And their main concern usually at that point, quite frankly, is visits. When are my visits? What are my visits? So we haven't even spoken about there's been no psychosocial before the mediation. So how do we know what we're asking for in mediation? There's just not, I don't think, valuable discourse if no one's spoken to my client.
Thanks, Renee. And again, can you introduce yourself again and what you do, please?
Sure. I do respondent work in the 2nd and respondent and GAL work in the 10th.
Thanks, Renee. Appreciate it. We're glad you're here. Any other last recommendations before we go? Are we going to go to case 2?
I think we will. Even without Brian, but
it may be held up in court.
It may be held up, yeah.
But we could still present this. So again, thank you. Would anyone else have a recommendation or any final thoughts before we go to our second case presentation of the day?
I did actually.
Great.
Okay.
It's good you have the last word.
I actually realized that I don't know how one of the slides that I had was not on that one up there, which actually was, oh, that sounds familiar. You asked me, well, how do you match the right treatment? Well, I was actually using the analogy of a Band-Aid. I really like analogies in the world. They help me understand something as unclear as psychosocial stuff. Because if you cover a wound without knowing why that is a wound, you run the risk of serious infection, of misdiagnosing. So if you're going to cover something with a Band-Aid, say, well, that person needs substance abuse treatment. That person's drinking, this person needs substance abuse treatment. All right. Well, if in the Band-Aid analogy, you're covering up, you don't know what is the condition underneath that wound. I mean, is it skin cancer? Is it just a dry patch of skin for eczema? There's a big difference. Is it schizophrenia? Is it adjustment disorder? That goes back to the different kinds of mental health diagnoses. But a lot of treatment is like you talk about the cookie cutter thing. That's the problem of cookie cutter work is you look like a person who needs substance abuse. Okay, that's good. You look like a person who's highly depressed or highly anxious, and so you need to go to the therapist. You don't, the issue of good medical workup, you have clients who are so marginalized that they don't ever see anybody for anything in their lives. And I know that I feel like I know that people want to have a solution for the variety of things that are wrong, but I think we have to get with the variety of things that are wrong on a table to look at how we come to, like, talking about getting the agencies involved that can provide a community referral. But anyway, that whole Band-Aid analogy is putting a Band-Aid on something, you have no idea what you might be covering up to make worse. So that's all.
Thank you, Susan. Great. That was a great way to finish this segment. Let's we're coming on to about 5 minutes to 1. We have about 20 minutes left in our session and a good 10 minutes or 15 minutes to present our second case. So